Hello everyone. Go to Settings, then after go to Power by Admin Settings. If you want to enable the features, so you should have admin access for tenant setting. So in this tenant settings have so many features, see it and why this is needed. Microsoft Fabric. Data Activator. Enabled for the entire organization. Turn on Data Activator Preview to allow users to define a specific set of conditions about their data, and then receive notifications when those conditions are met. After they receive notifications, users can take action to correct the change in conditions. This setting can be managed at both the tenant and the capacity levels. Data Activator is currently available in these regions. When you turn on Data Activator, you agree to the Data Activator preview terms. Users can create Fabric items. Enabled for the entire organization. Users can use production-ready features to create Fabric items. Turning off this setting doesn't impact users' ability to create Power BI items. This setting can be managed at both the tenant and the capacity levels. Users can create Fabric environments to save and apply Spark settings. Enabled for the entire organization. In Synapse Data Engineering and Data Science, users can select specific Spark runtimes, configure compute resources, and install libraries, and then save their choices as an environment. Environments can be attached to workspaces, notebooks, and Spark job definitions. Sustainability solutions. Disabled for the entire organization. Turn on this setting to give your tenant users the permission to deploy the sustainability solutions and its associated capabilities. Retail data solutions. Disabled for the entire organization. With retail data solutions, manage retail data at scale to improve customer experience and drive operational efficiency across the organization. Healthcare data solutions. Disabled for the entire organization. Use advanced AI analytics to help generate new insights, enhance patient care, and improve outcomes. Create Event House. Disabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can use Event House. Database mirroring. Disabled for the entire organization. Users can connect to and continuously replicate data from an external database into Fabric OneLake via Delta tables. Once in OneLake, users can operationalize the data, i.e., run analytics with Spark, execute notebooks, visualize through Power BI reports, etc. This setting can be managed at both the tenant and the capacity levels. Help and support settings. Publish Get Help information. Disabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can go to internal help and support resources from the Power BI Help menu. Disabled. Receive email notifications for service outages or incidents. Disabled for the entire organization. Mail-enabled security groups will receive email notifications if this tenant is impacted by a service outage or incident. Disabled. Users can try Microsoft Fabric paid features. Enabled for the entire organization. When users sign up for a Microsoft Fabric trial, they can try Fabric paid features for free for 60 days from the day they signed up. Show a custom message before publishing reports. Disabled for the entire organization. When people attempt to publish a report, they'll see a custom message before it gets published. Disabled. Domain management settings. Allow tenant and domain admins to override workspace assignments. Enabled for the entire organization. Tenant and domain admins can reassign workspaces that were previously assigned to one domain to another domain. Enabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Workspace settings. Create workspaces. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can create app workspaces to collaborate on dashboards, reports, and other content. Even if this setting is disabled, a workspace will be created when a template app is installed. Use semantic models across workspaces. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can use semantic models across workspaces if they have the required build permission. Block users from reassigning personal workspaces. Disabled for the entire organization. Turn on this setting to prevent users from reassigning their personal workspaces from premium capacities to shared capacities. Disabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Define workspace retention period. Enabled for the entire organization. Turn on this setting to define a retention period during which you can restore a deleted workspace and recover items in it. At the end of the retention period, the workspace is permanently deleted. By default, workspaces are always retained for a minimum of 7 days before they're permanently deleted. Turn off this setting to accept the minimum retention period of 7 days. After 7 days, the workspace and items in it will be permanently deleted. Enter the number of days to retain a workspace before it's permanently deleted. My workspaces will be retained for 30 days automatically. Other workspaces can be retained for up to 90 days. Enabled. Enter number of days, 7 to 90. 7. This setting applies to the entire organization. Information protection. Allow users to apply sensitivity labels for content. Disabled for the entire organization. With this setting enabled, Microsoft Purview information protection sensitivity labels published to users by your organization can be applied. All prerequisite steps must be completed before enabling this setting. Note: sensitivity label settings, such as encryption and content marking for files and emails, are not applied to content. Visit the Microsoft Purview Compliance portal to view sensitivity label settings for your organization. Note: sensitivity labels and protection are only applied to files exported to Excel, PowerPoint, or PDF files that are controlled by Export to Excel and Export Reports as PowerPoint presentation or PDF documents settings. All other export and sharing options do not support the application of sensitivity labels and protection. Disabled. The setting below determines which users in the organization can apply and change sensitivity labels. All other users in the organization can only view the labels. Apply sensitivity labels from data sources to their data in Power BI. Disabled for the entire organization. Only sensitivity labels from supported data sources will be applied. Please see the documentation for details about supported data sources and how their sensitivity labels are applied in Power BI. Learn about supported data sources. Disabled. Additional data sources may be supported in the future. With this feature enabled, the sensitivity labels from these data sources will also be applied in Power BI. Automatically apply sensitivity labels to downstream content. Disabled for the entire organization. With this setting enabled, whenever a sensitivity label is changed or applied to Fabric content, the label will also be applied to its eligible downstream content. Disabled. Allow workspace admins to override automatically applied sensitivity labels. Disabled for the entire organization. With this setting enabled, workspace admins can change or remove sensitivity labels that were applied automatically by Fabric, for example, as a result of label inheritance. Disabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Restrict content with protected labels from being shared via link with everyone in your organization. Disabled for the entire organization. This setting will prevent content with protection settings in the sensitivity label from being shared via link with everyone in your organization. Disabled. To enable, you need to allow users to apply sensitivity labels for Fabric content and allow shareable links to grant access to everyone in your organization. This setting applies to the entire organization. Increase the number of users who can edit and republish encrypted PBIX files. Disabled for the entire organization. Turn on this setting to allow users who've been assigned restrictive sensitivity permissions in the Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal to open, edit, and publish encrypted PBIX files in Power BI Desktop. Some limitations apply. Disabled. Export and sharing settings. External data sharing. Disabled for the entire organization. Users can share a read-only link to data stored in OneLake with collaborators outside your organization. When you grant them permission to do so, users can share a link to data in lakehouses and additional Fabric items. Collaborators who receive the link can view, build on, and share the data both within and beyond their own Fabric tenants, using their organization's licenses and capacities. Disabled. Usage of shared data within a recipient tenant is not restricted by policies within your tenant, such as conditional access, information protection, Microsoft Cloud App Security, etc. Shared data may also be processed outside the region where it's stored. Users can accept external data shares. Disabled for the entire organization. Users can accept a read-only link to data from another organization's Fabric tenant. Users who accept an external share link can view, build on, and share the data, both inside and outside of your organization's tenant. For more information about the security limitations of this preview feature, view the feature documentation. Disabled. Your organization is solely responsible for use of this feature. Potential risks include malicious intent on the part of the data provider, changes in the data at source, and legal liability arising from the accessing of regulated, proprietary, or sensitive data, responsibility for licensing enforcement, or the processing of data across regions. Guest users can access Microsoft Fabric. Enabled for the entire organization. Guest users who've been added to your Microsoft Entra directory can access Microsoft Fabric and any Fabric items they have permissions to. Enabled. With this setting off, guest users can't access Microsoft Fabric, even if they have permission to collaborate with internal users on Fabric items. Users can invite guest users to collaborate through item sharing and permissions. Enabled for the entire organization. Users can collaborate with people outside the organization by sharing Fabric items with them and granting them permission to access those items. After external users accept an invitation, they're added to your Microsoft Entra directory as guest users. Enabled. External users can't be invited through Fabric, but external users added directly to Microsoft Entra ID can still access or be given permission to items in Fabric. Guest users can browse and access Fabric content. Disabled for the entire organization. Users can invite guest users to browse and request access to Fabric content. Disabled. Users can see guest users in lists of suggested people. Enabled for the entire organization. With this setting on, users will see both users in your organization and guest users who've been added to your Microsoft Entra directory in lists of suggested people. With this setting off, users will see only users in your organization. Users can still share items with guests by providing their full email address. Publish to web. Enabled for the entire organization. People in your org can publish public reports on the web. Publicly published reports don't require authentication to view them. Go to Embed Codes in the admin portal to review and manage public embed codes. If any of the codes contain private or confidential content, remove them. Review embed codes regularly to make sure no confidential information is live on the web. About Publish to Web. Enabled. When Publish to Web is enabled, existing embed codes work. Choose if users can create new codes. Allow users to create new embed codes. To enable Publish to Web, you need to disable Block Public Internet Access first. Copy and paste visuals. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can copy visuals from a tile or report visual and paste them as static images into external applications. Export to Excel. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can export the data from a visualization or paginated report to an Excel file. Export to .csv. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can export data from a tile, visualization, or paginated report to a .csv file. Enabled. If the report or its underlying semantic model has an applied sensitivity label, the label and its protection settings, such as encryption, won't be applied to the exported .csv file. Download reports. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can download .lbx files and paginated reports. Users can work with semantic models in Excel using a live connection. Enabled for the entire organization. Users can export data to Excel from a report visual or semantic model, or export a semantic model to an Excel workbook with Analyze in Excel, both options with a live connection to the XMLA endpoint. Export reports as PowerPoint presentations or PDF documents. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can export reports as PowerPoint files or PDF documents. Export reports as HTML documents. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can export paginated reports as HTML documents. Export reports as Word documents. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can export paginated reports as Word documents. Export reports as XML documents. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can export paginated reports as XML documents. Export reports as image files. Disabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can use the Export Report to File API to export reports as image files. Disabled. If the report or its underlying semantic model has an applied sensitivity label, the label and its protection settings, such as encryption, won't be applied to the exported image file. Print dashboards and reports. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can print dashboards and reports. Enabled. With this option enabled, dashboard and report content may be printed regardless of sensitivity labels and data protection settings applied to them or to their underlying semantic model. Certification. Disabled for the entire organization. Choose whether people in your org or specific security groups can certify items, like apps, reports, or data marts, as trusted sources for the wider organization. Will be visible along with the certification badge. Users can set up email subscriptions. Enabled for the entire organization. Users can create email subscriptions to reports and dashboards. Enabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Guest users can set up and subscribe to email subscriptions. Enabled for the entire organization. Guest users can set up and subscribe to email subscriptions. With this setting off, only users in your organization can set up and subscribe to email subscriptions. Enabled. Turning off this setting also turns off the following setting: users can send email subscriptions to guest users. Users can send email subscriptions to guest users. Enabled for the entire organization. Users can send email subscriptions to guest users. With this setting off, users in your organization can't subscribe guest users to subscription emails. Enabled. This setting will be turned off automatically if the following setting is turned off. Guest users can set up and subscribe to email subscriptions. Featured content. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can promote their published content to the featured section of Power BI Home. Allow connections to featured tables. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can access and perform calculations on data from featured tables. Featured tables are defined in the modeling view in Power BI Desktop and made available through Data Types Gallery of Excel. Allow shareable links to grant access to everyone in your organization. Enabled for the entire organization. This setting will grant access to anyone in your organization with the link. It won't work for external users. Enable Microsoft Teams integration. Enabled for the entire organization. This setting allows people in the organization to access features associated with the Microsoft Teams and Power BI integration. This includes launching Teams experiences from the Power BI service like chats, the Power BI app for Teams, and receiving Power BI notifications in Teams. To completely enable or disable Teams integration, work with your Teams admin. Install Power BI app for Microsoft Teams automatically. Enabled for the entire organization. The Power BI app for Microsoft Teams is installed automatically for users when they use Microsoft Fabric. The app is installed for users if they have Microsoft Teams, and the Power BI app is allowed in the Teams admin portal. When the app is installed, users receive notifications in Teams and can more easily discover and collaborate with colleagues. The Power BI app for Teams provides users with the ability to open all Fabric content. Enable Power BI add-in for PowerPoint. Enabled for the entire organization. Let people in your org embed Power BI data into their PowerPoint presentations. This integration requires that your organization's Microsoft Office admin has enabled support for add-ins. Allow direct query connections to Power BI semantic models. Enabled for the entire organization. Direct query connections allow users to make changes to existing semantic models or use them to build new ones. Guest users can work with shared semantic models in their own tenants. Disabled for the entire organization. Authorized guest users can discover semantic models shared with them in the OneLake Data Hub, in Power BI Desktop, and then work with these semantic models in their own Power BI tenants. Disabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Allow specific users to turn on external data sharing. Enabled for the entire organization. Turn off this setting to prevent all users from turning on external data sharing. If this setting is on, all or specific users can turn on the external data sharing option, allowing them to share data with authorized guest users. Authorized guest users can then discover, connect to, and work with these shared semantic models in their own Power BI tenants. Enabled. If this setting is on, users can allow authorized guest users to work with shared semantic models in their own Power BI tenants, and your data might be moved to a different region. Discovery settings. Make promoted content discoverable. Enabled for the entire organization. Allow users in this org who can promote content to make content they promote discoverable by users who don't have access to it. Make certified content discoverable. Enabled for the entire organization. Allow users in the org who can certify content to make content they certify discoverable by users who don't have access to it. Discover content. Enabled for the entire organization. Allow users to find and request access to content they don't have access to if it was made discoverable by its owners. App settings. Create template organizational apps. Disabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can create template apps that use semantic models built on one data source in Power BI Desktop. Disabled. Push apps to end users. Enabled for the entire organization. Users can share apps directly with end users without requiring installation from app source. Publish apps to the entire organization. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can publish apps to the entire organization. Integration settings. Allow XMLA endpoints and analyze in Excel with on-premises semantic models. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can use Excel to view and interact with on-premises Power BI semantic models. This also allows connections to XMLA endpoints. Semantic Model Execute Queries REST API. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can query semantic models by using data analysis expressions, DAX, through Power BI REST APIs. Use ArcGIS maps for Power BI. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can use the ArcGIS maps for Power BI visualization provided by Esri. Enabled. By selecting Enabled, you agree that ArcGIS maps for Power BI may use Esri services located outside of your Power BI tenant's geographic region, compliance boundary, or national cloud instance. Esri may store and process your data in the United States or any other country in which Esri maintains facilities. Use of ArcGIS maps for Power BI is subject to the Esri terms and privacy policy. This setting applies to the entire organization. Use global search for Power BI. Enabled for the entire organization. Enabled. By selecting Enabled, you agree that users use Azure Search External Search Index. This setting applies to the entire organization. Use Azure Maps Visual. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can use the Azure Maps visualization. Enabled. By selecting Enabled, you agree that Azure Maps visuals may use Azure services located outside of your Power BI tenant's geographic region, compliance boundary, or national cloud instance. This feature uses mapping capabilities that are powered by a third party, TomTom, and operate outside your tenant's geographic region, compliance boundary, or national cloud instance. Microsoft shares the address and location queries with TomTom, but not the name of the customer or end user who entered the query. This feature is non-regional and the queries you provide may be stored and processed in the United States or any other country in which Microsoft or its sub-processors operate. Use of Azure Maps is subject to the following terms. This setting applies to the entire organization. Map and filled map visuals. Enabled for the entire organization. Allow people in your org to use the map and filled map visualizations in their reports. Enabled. By selecting Enabled, you agree that map and filled map visuals may use Bing services located outside of your Power BI tenant's geographic region, compliance boundary, or national cloud instance. This feature uses mapping capabilities that are powered in part by third parties, TomTom and SK Telecom, and operate outside your tenant's geographic region, compliance boundary, or national cloud instance. Microsoft shares the address and location queries with these third parties, but not the name of the customer or end user who entered the query. This feature is non-regional and the queries you provide may be stored and processed in the United States or any other country in which Microsoft or its sub-processors operate. Use of map and filled map is subject to the following terms. This setting applies to the entire organization. Integration with SharePoint and Microsoft lists. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can launch Power BI from SharePoint lists and Microsoft lists. Then they can build Power BI reports on the data in those lists and publish them back to the lists. Dremio SSO. Disabled for the entire organization. Enable SSO capability for Dremio. By enabling, user access token information, including name and email, will be sent to Dremio for authentication. Disabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Snowflake SSO. Disabled for the entire organization. Enable SSO capability for Snowflake. By enabling, user access token information, including name and email, will be sent to Snowflake for authentication. Disabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Redshift SSO. Disabled for the entire organization. Enable SSO capability for Redshift. By enabling, user access token information, including name and email, will be sent to Redshift for authentication. Disabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Google BigQuery SSO. Disabled for the entire organization. Enable SSO capability for Google BigQuery. By enabling, user access token information, including name and email, will be sent to Google BigQuery for authentication. Disabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Microsoft Entra Single Sign-On for Data Gateway. Disabled for the entire organization. Users can use Microsoft Entra Single Sign-On, SSO, to authenticate to on-premises data gateways and access data sources. With this setting on, user access token information, including names and emails, is sent to data sources to authenticate to the on-premises data gateway service. Disabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Power Platform Solutions integration. Enabled for the entire organization. Allow integration with Power Platform Solutions. Users can view Power BI files saved in OneDrive and SharePoint. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can view Power BI files saved in OneDrive for Business or SharePoint document libraries. The permissions to save and share Power BI files in OneDrive and SharePoint document libraries are controlled by permissions managed in OneDrive and SharePoint. Enabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Users can share links to Power BI files stored in OneDrive and SharePoint through Power BI Desktop. Enabled for the entire organization. Users who have saved Power BI files, .lbx, to OneDrive and SharePoint can share links to those files using Power BI Desktop. Enabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Enable granular access control for all data connections. Disabled for the entire organization. Enforce strict access control for all data connection types. When this is turned on, shared items will be disconnected from data sources if they're edited by users who don't have permission to use the data connections. Disabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Semantic models can export data to OneLake. Enabled for the entire organization. Semantic models configured for OneLake integration can send import tables to OneLake. Once the data is in OneLake, users can include the exported tables in Fabric items, including lake houses and warehouses. Enabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Users can store semantic model tables in OneLake. Enabled for the entire organization. When users turn on OneLake integration for their semantic models, data imported into semantic model tables can be stored in OneLake. To allow users to turn on OneLake integration for their semantic models, you'll also need to turn on the semantic models can export data to OneLake tenant setting. Semantic model owners can choose to automatically update semantic models from files imported from OneDrive or SharePoint. Enabled for the entire organization. Semantic model owners can choose to allow semantic models to be automatically updated with changes made to the corresponding Power BI files, .lbx, stored in OneDrive or SharePoint. File changes can include new and modified data connections. Turn off this setting to prevent automatic updates to semantic models. Enabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Power BI visuals. Allow visuals created using the Power BI SDK. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can add, view, share, and interact with visuals imported from AppSource or from a file. Visuals allowed in the Organizational Visuals page are not affected by this setting. Add and use certified visuals only. Disabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization with permissions to add and use visuals can add and use certified visuals only. Visuals allowed in the Organizational Visuals page are not affected by this setting, regardless of certification. Disabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Allow downloads from custom visuals. Disabled for the entire organization. Enabling this setting will let custom visuals download any information available to the visual, such as summarized data and visual configuration, upon user consent. It is not affected by download restrictions applied in your organization's export and sharing settings. Disabled. If the report or its underlying semantic model has an applied sensitivity label, the label and its protection settings, such as encryption, won't be applied to the exported file. Custom visuals can get users Microsoft Entra access tokens. Disabled for the entire organization. Custom visuals can get the Microsoft Entra access tokens of signed-in users. Disabled. Allow access to the browser's local storage. Enabled for the entire organization. When this setting is on, custom visuals can store information on the user's browser's local storage. R and Python visual settings. Interact with and share R and Python visuals. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can interact with and share visuals created with R or Python scripts. Enabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Audit and usage settings. Usage metrics for content creators. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can see usage metrics for dashboards, reports, and semantic models that they have appropriate permissions to. Per user data in usage metrics for content creators. Enabled for the entire organization. Usage metrics for content creators will expose display names and email addresses of users who are accessing content. Azure Log Analytics connections for workspace administrators. Disabled for the entire organization. Disabled. Dashboard settings. Web content on dashboard tiles. Disabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can add and view web content tiles on Power BI dashboards. Note, this may expose your org to security risks via malicious web content. Disabled. Developer settings. Embed content in apps. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can embed Power BI dashboards and reports in web applications using Embed for Your Customers method. Service principals can use Fabric APIs. Disabled for the entire organization. Web apps registered in Microsoft Entra ID can use service principals, rather than user credentials, to authenticate to Fabric APIs. To allow an app to use a service principal as an authentication method, the service principal must be added to an allowed security group. Service principals included in allowed security groups will have read-only access to all the information available through admin APIs, which can include user names and emails, and detailed metadata about semantic models and reports. Disabled. Service principals can use APIs to access tenant-level features controlled by Fabric admins and enabled for the entire organization or for security groups they're included in. You can control access of service principals by creating dedicated security groups for them and using these groups in any Fabric tenant-level settings. Allow service principals to create and use profiles. Disabled for the entire organization. Allow service principals in your organization to create and use profiles. Disabled. Get and delete service principals profile APIs are not affected by this feature. Block resource key authentication. Disabled for the entire organization. For extra security, block using resource key-based authentication. This means users not allowed to use streaming semantic models API using resource key. Disabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Admin API settings. Service principals can access read-only admin APIs. Disabled for the entire organization. Web apps registered in Microsoft Entra ID can use service principals, rather than user credentials, to authenticate to read-only admin APIs. To allow an app to use a service principal as an authentication method, the service principal must be added to an allowed security group. Service principals included in allowed security groups will have read-only access to all the information available through admin APIs, which can include users' names and emails, and detailed metadata about semantic models and reports. Disabled. Enhance admin APIs responses with detailed metadata. Disabled for the entire organization. Users and service principals allowed to call Power BI admin APIs may get detailed metadata about Power BI items. For example, responses from GetScanResult APIs will contain the names of semantic model tables and columns. Note: for this setting to apply to service principals, make sure the tenant setting allowing service principals to use read-only admin APIs is enabled. Disabled. Enhance admin APIs responses with DAX and mashup expressions. Disabled for the entire organization. Users and service principals eligible to call Power BI admin APIs will get detailed metadata about queries and expressions comprising Power BI items. For example, responses from GetScanResult API will contain DAX and mashup expressions. Note: for this setting to apply to service principals, make sure the tenant setting allowing service principals to use read-only admin APIs is enabled. Disabled. Gen 1 data flow settings. Create and use Gen 1 data flows. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can create and use Gen 1 data flows. Enabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Template app settings. Published template apps. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can publish template apps for distribution to clients outside of the organization. Enabled. The settings below will determine which users can publish template apps outside the organization. Install template apps. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can install template apps created outside the organization. When a template app is installed, an upgraded workspace is created. Enabled. The settings below will determine which users can install template apps on their Power BI accounts. Install template apps not listed in AppSource. Disabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization who have been granted permission to install template apps which were not published to Microsoft AppSource. Disabled. The settings below will determine which users can install template apps which were not published to AppSource, and as such not validated by Microsoft. Q&A settings. Review questions. Enabled for the entire organization. Allow semantic model owners to review questions people asked about their data. Synonym sharing. Enabled for the entire organization. Allow people to share Q&A synonyms with your organization. Enabled. Keep in mind, if you disable and then re-enable the setting, it may take a few weeks to share all synonyms with everyone in your org again. This setting applies to the entire organization. Semantic model security. Block republish and disable package refresh. Disabled for the entire organization. Disable package refresh, and only allow the semantic model owner to publish updates. Disabled. Only the semantic model owner will be allowed to publish updates. This includes deployment pipeline semantic model updates. This setting applies to the entire organization. Advanced networking. Azure Private Link. Disabled for the entire organization. Increase security by allowing people to use a private link to access your Fabric tenant. Someone will need to finish the setup process in Azure. If that's not you, grant permission to the right person or group by entering their email. Setup instructions. Review the considerations and limitations section before enabling private endpoints. Disabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Block public internet access. Disabled for the entire organization. For extra security, block access to your Fabric tenant via the public internet. This means people who don't have access to the private link won't be able to get in. Keep in mind, turning this on could take 10 to 20 minutes to take effect. Setup instructions. Disabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Metrics settings. Create and use metrics. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can create and use metrics. User experience experiments. Help Power BI optimize your experience. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in this organization will get minor user experience variations that the Power BI team is experimenting with, including content, layout, and design, before they go live for all users. Enabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Share data with your Microsoft 365 services. Users can see Microsoft Fabric metadata in Microsoft 365. Enabled for the entire organization. Turn on this setting to store and display certain Microsoft Fabric metadata in Microsoft 365 services. Users might see Microsoft Fabric metadata, including content titles and types or open and sharing history, in M365 services like search results and recommended content lists. Metadata from Microsoft Fabric semantic models will not be displayed. Users can browse or get recommendations only for content they have access to. This setting is automatically enabled only if your Microsoft Fabric and M365 tenants are in the same geographical region. You may disable this setting. Where is my Microsoft Fabric tenant located? Enabled. Turn on this setting to allow users within your organization to see Power BI metadata in Microsoft 365 services even if these tenants are located in different geographical regions. Certain Power BI metadata may be stored in different geographical regions to those used by your Power BI tenant or national cloud instance. Disabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Insight settings. Receive notifications for top insights. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can enable notifications for top insights in report settings. Show entry points for insights. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can use entry points for requesting insights inside reports. Data Mart settings. Create data marts. Enabled for the entire organization. Users in the organization can create data marts. Data model settings. Users can edit data models in the Power BI service. Enabled for the entire organization. Turn on this setting to allow users to edit data models in the service. This setting doesn't apply to direct lake semantic models or editing a semantic model through an API or XMLA endpoint. Quick measure suggestions. Allow quick measure suggestions. Enabled for the entire organization. Allow users to use natural language to generate suggested measures. Allow user data to leave their geography. Disabled for the entire organization. Quick measure suggestions are currently processed in the US. When this setting is enabled, users will get quick measure suggestions for data outside the US. Disabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Scale out settings. Scale out queries for large semantic models. Enabled for the entire organization. For semantic models that use the large semantic model storage format, Power BI Premium can automatically distribute queries across additional semantic model replicas when query volume is high. Enabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. OneLake settings. Users can access data stored in OneLake with apps external to Fabric. Enabled for the entire organization. Users can access data stored in OneLake with apps external to the Fabric environment, such as custom applications created with Azure Data Lake Storage, ADLS, APIs, OneLake File Explorer, and Databricks. Users can already access data stored in OneLake with apps internal to the Fabric environment, such as Spark, Data Engineering, and Data Warehouse. Enabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Users can sync data in OneLake with the OneLake File Explorer app. Enabled for the entire organization. Turn on this setting to allow users to use OneLake File Explorer. This app will sync OneLake items to Windows File Explorer, similar to OneDrive. Enabled. This setting applies to the entire organization. Git integration. Users can synchronize workspace items with their Git repositories. Enabled for the entire organization. Users can import and export workspace items to Git repositories for collaboration and version control. Turn off this setting to prevent users from syncing workspace items with their Git repositories. Users can export items to Git repositories in other geographical locations. Enabled for the entire organization. The workspace and the Git repository may reside in different geographies. Turn on this setting to allow users to export items to Git repositories in other geographies. Users can export workspace items with applied sensitivity labels to Git repositories. Enabled for the entire organization. Turn on this setting to allow users to export items with applied sensitivity labels to their Git repositories. Enabled. Sensitivity labels assigned to workspace items are not included in the metadata files exported to Git repositories. Copilot and Azure OpenAI Service. Users can use a preview of Copilot and other features powered by Azure OpenAI New. Disabled for the entire organization. When this setting is enabled, users can access a preview and use preview features powered by Azure OpenAI, including Copilot. This setting can be managed at both the tenant and the capacity levels. For customers in the EU data boundary, this setting adheres to Microsoft Fabric's EU data boundary commitments. By enabling this setting, you agree to the preview terms. Disabled. Note, if Azure OpenAI is not available in your geographic region, your data may need to be processed outside your capacity's geographic region, compliance boundary, or national cloud instance. To allow data to be processed outside your capacity's geographic region, turn on the related setting. Data sent to Azure OpenAI can be processed outside your capacity's geographic region, compliance boundary, or national cloud instance. Data sent to Azure OpenAI can be processed outside your capacity's geographic region, compliance boundary, or national cloud instance new. Disabled for the entire organization. This setting is only applicable for customers who want to use Copilot and AI features in Fabric powered by Azure OpenAI, and whose capacity's geographic region is outside of EU data boundary and US. When this setting is enabled, data sent to Azure OpenAI can be processed outside your capacity's geographic boundary or national cloud boundary. This setting can be managed at both the tenant and the capacity levels. By enabling this setting, you agree to the preview terms. Disabled. Note, even if this setting is on, you will also need to turn on the related setting. Users can use a preview of Copilot and other features powered by Azure OpenAI for these features to work.